Hello. If you want to lead introductions.
I will.
All right.
So, welcome to our panel. My name is Lisa Hagar. I'm a professor here at UW-Waukesha. And I also am currently teaching international steampunk literature. So I'm really excited to have with us today Diana Poe, who is editor and contributor to Beyond Victoriana, founder.
Yeah, the Beyond Victoriana started in 2009, as just this personal side project because I was looking at steampunk and I was thinking about ways that steampunk addresses aspects of industrialization at its root and how that kind of affects other cultures. If you think about how other cultures interact, with industrialization and with the cultural and historical implications of the 19th century. And, I made it into a blog. I've been running it ever since. In the steampunk community, I'm also known as Alien the Peacemaker. That's my steampunk persona, and she is a Tonkinese Buddhist assassin for hire. So she's just a woman who likes to shoot French imperialists in the face, basically. In addition, for my day job, I'm an editor at Tor Books, which is the largest science fiction fantasy publisher in the United States. I also blog for their sister company, Tor.com, under the same name of Alien the Peacemaker. And on top of that, I also go around the country doing talks about fandom and social justice issues. So that's just me in a nutshell.
Awesome. And general awesomeness ensues.
Oh, thanks.
So, since we have such a small audience, please, I would envision this being very conversational, so if you have anything you'd like to add or questions you'd like to ask,
I came to introduce you.
Hi.
Oh,
we've
I know.
already introduced ourselves.
I wasn't
Sure.
sure because I figured you.
We thought we'd be all nice and informal.
Good.
Thanks.
That's the best way to be.
Thanks.
Right.
I'm glad that you're able to participate. And just so you know, this conversation is being recorded for my blog as
Ooh,
well.
all right.
So, so first of all, I think that it's a useful activity to do when talking about steampunk in a wide audience. I would like to hear from Diana how you define steampunk and what you see as its major, how about current trends? Or some of the current trends? Yeah.
Okay, great. When people ask for my definition, there are so many definitions, first of all. If you ask, 5 steampunks how they define steampunk, you get, 10 different answers. And so when people ask me, I have, 2 basic, ideas I throw out. One, my nutshell definition is it's an art movement inspired by 19th century science fiction fantasy. And I typically define it that way because, one, I think at this point steampunk has moved beyond genre. It's understood as, I personally understand it as an aesthetic, a stylistic choice that is applied across many different media forms. So that's why you have steampunk books, steampunk movies, games, toys, modding, technology, fashion designing clothes, types of cooking, apparently, all sorts of ways that steampunk has been applied. And so that's why I now consider it as a sort of art movement or art school at this point. And in addition to that, I do think steampunk has an ideological component. There has been conversations within the community and outside the community saying, oh, is it punk? Is it not punk? What does it mean if it is? And to me, I think that steampunk is inherently subversive towards our understanding of historical norms. And I say that specifically because a lot of people talk about steampunk and say, oh, it's the what ifs, or, what if Tesla, was more popular than Edison? What if, women got the right to vote earlier? And so I do like the exploration of questions that, talk about, 19th century culture in this light. But what I also think is important to stress is that steampunk is not historically accurate, and not only is it not historically accurate, but it is fully reflective of how our current society not only views history, but views our relationship to history, and what we assume history is about. And that self-reflexiveness is also very important, not only in how people incorporate the aesthetic in their artworks, but also how people themselves understand certain aspects of history and all the socio-political dynamics of it. You know, for example, people often make assumptions, oh, because Victorians are like X, we are so much better than them. And there has been like examples like, it was different time period, they had different cultural ideas, but that does not necessarily mean our ideas today are much better or have changed, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's also very important when considering the punk aspect, because then to be punk and steampunk not only means to question historical norms, but our understanding of what those norms were and our understanding of ourselves today and how it's all totally linked and applicable. So. Yeah.
Okay, do you guys know about steampunk?
Yeah.
Okay,
I've been learning. I'm
because
not
I
like
don't.
a pro or anything.
I don't.
I'm the same.
And so, can you give me an example?
Yeah, a good. Well, I was going to say good example of steampunk. An example, a commonly known example of steampunk is the show Wild Wild West, the show and the film, because it incorporates retrofuturistic technology in historical environment. So that's basically it.
Basically, like more like coal-fired steam engines rather than like a nuclear-powered, computer.
Right. Or like, another good example is William Gibson and Bruce Sterling's Difference Engine. That is actually considered like the first, modern steampunk novel. And the premise was, what if the computer was invented in the 1800s and the computer age came then, and extrapolate from there. So technology is really key on how I like to understand steampunk. And because not only it's talking about like, oh, now you got ray guns, or you got like all sorts of like, inventive machinery and stuff. But you also think about how this technology changes, perceptions in society. The Industrial Revolution itself was so dramatic because it wasn't, about like different means of production, but it was also about how do gender roles change because of that? How does our concept of time change because of that? How does the relationship between the West and the non-West change because of that? And how all those processes still affect us today, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of it.
It totally rearranged our society. We went from like not living together to cramming in these cities, like
right. And all
the industrial age.
Right.
Well,
and what
we
is
had that
it?
Before, even as far back as ancient times, but that was more for defense.
Yeah.
Cram inside a wall.
Yeah, and it also talks. Yes, pull up a chair. And it also intimately talks about when you say that something is steampunk, and it has to do with our concept of technology. It also talks deeply about it's more than just machinery, but it is how human beings relate to machines. And I think that now it's a common reason why you ask steampunks today, like, oh, why is steampunk relevant? They're like, well, it's because our relationship to technology today is also changing. We're also going through a current technological revolution where it's the age of the internet, it's the age of small Apple boxes proliferating everywhere. It's the age that where we used to be able to tactily understand the machines that we interact with every day, but now we don't, even though we're totally dependent upon it. As we can see, our smartphones have become our modern day pocket watches. We all have one. We all have to rely on it for so many things. It helps dictate our lives in a sort of weird way. And so people often say that they like steampunk because it has a different view of technology that we don't have anymore. It reestablishes a tactile relationship. It reestablishes an understanding of technology that the average person can still reasonably learn on their own independently. it talks about why we think growing up technology is now considered okay and natural. And that's actually another interesting thought, because during the Industrial Revolution, a big conflict was like, man and technology versus nature. What is, like, do we suddenly, back in the 19th century, people thought, did we suddenly lose our contact with nature because we have because we're developing in this way? And now, what steampunk does, it's very interesting, is that, it takes that idea about man and technology and integrates them into the cyborg identity. So now, instead of questioning, like technology and retrofuturistic technology, man, becoming machine and all that stuff, is that scary? No, that's like freaking awesome. With our like cyborg arms and like our doodad gadgets that we like run around with everywhere, but we still want to adapt them in a way that is still humanized, and I think that also has become a big appeal of how people relate to steampunk and technology. So,
was that an answer to a question?
It was a slight question.
It was called. Give an example, please.
So basically, general examples that you would see a lot, or you see a lot of influences that are steampunk. As I mentioned before, Wild Wild West, because anachronistic technology in historical setting. There's also examples, I'm trying to, that I like to pull out, which are non-Western examples. A great one are Eastern Westerns, which is a film genre that started when basically Western directors would create spaghetti Western films, but they were based on Kurosawa samurai films as an inspiration. And then Kurosawa also in turn was inspired by Western filmmakers, and he has a lot of adaptations that take Western canon and put them in a Japanese context. And now you actually have a whole subgenre of films that are they're like Westerns, but they take place in Asia. A really great example is The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. There's a Korean film that came out a few years ago. It's a direct homage to Good, Bad, and the Ugly, but it takes place in Manchuria, and it's pretty amazing. There's a train robbery. There's this hunt for this secret treasure, but if you look at it, it includes all this technology of the 19th century, but puts it in a Western context, Eastern context. Another great example is Tai Chi Hero and Tai Chi Zero, which is actually the first official quote unquote Chinese steampunk films that came out in the last couple of years. And the premise it's full of Miyazaki technology ingrained throughout. But the whole premise is that it's a kung fu movie, but it takes place in a village and their big their big antagonist is someone who wants to build a railroad through their village. And so again, it addresses direct questions about technology, industrialization, how it can change society, and I think it's also really interesting when looking at non-Western cultures, because it talks about how do we deal with Westernization, how do we still maintain our own cultural identities, and also grapple with the issues of colonialism and imperialism, because all these Europeans are trying to come and take away our resources and our means of power. Which is another reason why I think steampunk, looking at in a historical context, is so fascinating. Oftentimes you get it's about adventures, it's about people flying in airships, it's about having tea with the queen. It's about running around with all these intricate gadgets and doing things and being a hero.
It's like the recent Sherlock Holmes movies.
Right, the recent Sherlock Holmes movies. And what other questions I find more interesting is what are the contexts that enable these people to have these adventures? What are the people that are lost in the background? What are things we don't talk about that happened in the 19th century that also fueled the Industrial Revolution, like slavery and child labor and and the British and the role of empire, all those aspects. Which are equally important because we are still dealing with the aftermath of all those today. So,
Can you say the name of the movies? I got the good, bad, and the weird. What was the other?
Tai Chi Zero and Tai Chi Hero. They're two different films.
We're gonna be watching Tai Chi Zero in my class.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
pretty excited about
I'm
it.
excited.
Yeah. It's really fun. It's a really fun movie. I highly recommend it.
What's your class?
Oh, I'm teaching international steampunk literature right now here at UW-Waukesha. I'm a professor.
International student.
Yep.
Yeah. So steampunk literature written by people who. Oh yeah, hand out the.
I know.
I was gonna say, do you have a reading list or something?
No, we have a book. So recently.
We have a couple of these, but
Oh yeah. So Diana, in addition to being an editor, is also a writer, and she contributed the introduction to
And these are
Steampunk
limited,
World.
so-
Monique doesn't need one because she has the book. Because she's in my class.
Steampunk World.
So
Is it published?
it's a really lovely collection. It was of non-Western narratives that are steampunk, and it's very nice. It's so
I've seen
inclusive
those.
in a
I
really
saw this
lovely
at
way.
Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, and
So that is your reading list.
yes, exactly. And I wrote the introduction to Steampunk World, and where I extrapolate more about why it's important to look at it outside of a Western context. But yeah, and the other postcard I passed out called Anatomy of Steampunk. That is a book project that I worked on with Catherine Gleason last year, and it specifically talks about steampunk fashion. Because now when it's hitting the mainstream, people are like, oh, I saw the clothes, and I love the clothes. And
That's why I'm here.
yeah, exactly. And so, and the book is interesting because how Catherine divided it is that she talks about fashion in different contexts. Like this is like couture, and this is like streetwear, and this is adventure wear, and by looking at it that way, she was able to bridge common conceptions about what steampunk is. Like so we incorporated like people from all over the world. There's like both like people from Japan to Poland, Italy, United States, and Canada, to encompass like what steampunk looks like in a local context and from that country. We also especially tried to reach out to people that were, again, marginalized by the fashion industry, because I think steampunk is inherently subversive. So we have people of all different body types and ages and abilities and different racial backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, because we both thought that was equally important to emphasize. This is what steampunk is capable of. Its potential is not trying to highlight, all the norms that you see every day, but to highlight everyone that is usually always excluded from it. So I highly recommend checking out the book. Yeah.
I'm convinced. I'm sold.
I think I've gotten all of my students to buy extra steampunk books. It's like, I'm like,
I've already
you
bought
should
2 extra.
you should go read this other thing.
The steam-powered one.
So I was wondering, since we're here at a festival of books, if you could talk about, because I know that you are an editor for Tor Books, and what kind of manuscripts are you getting currently, and what kind of literary trends do you see in steampunk literature, if there is if we can pin down steampunk literature as a thing, which
Right.
and even that's a different question, but what kinds of things are coming across your desk that you think are interesting, that are new, that are maybe continuing other existing strains of thought or things like that?
Well, I think it's very interesting. First of all, because I define steampunk as an aesthetic that can be applied across many different things. When you never actually get a quintessential steampunk book. You get it's steampunk romance or steampunk mystery or steampunk YA or or steampunk fashion book. And so when I actually am extremely picky about what manuscripts I read that are steampunk, because 99% of the time I've seen it already and I don't like it. But the things that I have seen, and the things that I also think are reflective of general trends in publishing, one is a more push toward diversity and representation, which is great. So I'm currently considering a manuscript right now that that takes place in a secondary fantasy world based on colonial South Africa. And I really, really enjoy it. Cross fingers, knock on wood. You know, so I think people are definitely looking outside of the Victorian England box. And when they do that, the stories become so much richer. It doesn't seem like, oh, I've read this steampunk story like same 20 billion times, but it becomes not only richer, but I think like more meaningful to like science fiction fantasy as a whole, because it tells stories that don't get typically addressed, or stories that seem that like are more universal and can reach out to people who do not necessarily like steampunk. They're like, oh, but I like this.
Right.
You know? And I think that's also very important. So, you know, but I also want to mention that, like, I do look at other manuscripts outside of steampunk.
Well, I know you read them.
Yeah. You know, and so it's just really interesting to see what things are becoming more popular. And I think one of the big things is that that I do enjoy steampunk that is closer to certain historical paradigms. In fact, that like, oh, this was based on a real life event, and I think it's super interesting for it to have a manuscript that says like, oh, this is based off a real life event that you don't know about, because it's not generally known to the public, or it was never taught in schools. And that's also what you'll see a lot in steampunk world. Are these stories that do have a basis in history. It's not all like fantasy, but you just don't know those histories. Another great recommendation I'd give, actually, if you like historical fiction, of that, is this anthology called Long Hidden. It was edited by Rose Fox and Daniel Jose Older. And it basically, the premise of the anthology is that, okay, we want stories, from the margins, taking place from like 1300 to like 1910. Whole period, you can write anything you want, but the person has to be of a marginalized background of some sort, and it has to have a historical basis. And the selections that they pulled out are really, really amazing. So I highly recommend. It's a great read.
And it was Long Hidden?
Yes,
Yeah.
It's called Long Hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Does anyone have any? I have other questions, but I want to hear. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask?
Well, what exactly about steampunk, like specifically, would you say would be like subversive? Like, what is it specifically challenging about the novel?
I think when I say norm, as I mentioned earlier, it's our relationship to history. That's what it directly challenges. Because we can't actually change history. We can't go back in time. We don't have time machines.
Not yet.
But what we not
Actually,
yet.
in Wisconsin,
Oh.
they
We
call,
do. No,
They call no. Actually, in Wisconsin, they call ATMs time machines.
Oh,
For real, I'm not kidding. It
well,
was a
that's
little
because
confusing
that
when I
was
first.
it was a brand name.
Yeah, and it's an acronym for Take Your Money Everywhere. It's TYME,
Oh.
right? But so people like older like Wisconsinites will be like, oh yeah, I need to go to the time machine, and you're like, what the heck? There's a time machine. Hard to swear. I'm like, there's no time machine at the gas station, people, right?
All right.
But yeah, so we don't have time machine. I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you.
No, that's fine. Factoids. Good to know.
Right, there you
go. But what we can change is our perception of how we relate to history and our perception of ourselves, because we are products of history. So when I say like it subverts it, it's not, you can like, purely subvert, like, oh, what if we put like stuff in a retrofuturistic context and talk about like, technology suddenly happening in the 1800s that didn't happen there before, and that could be like a great thought experiment, very interesting. What I also think is interesting is how like people project these concepts of retrofuturism into our present day. Like you have makers like Jake Von Slat and Datamancer, and they're like, what does technology look like if we make it more tactile but still functional? Recently, like, people have we evaluated the use of airships. There are now, there's now companies that have functional airships, and they're like, look, we learned from the Hindenburg. And even though it's slower, it's not useless, because airships are able to transplant, goods to places that don't have landing fields. So, because previously the only type of aircraft technology was the helicopter, and even those can be unstable. But airships provide that stability to transport goods to regions that were previously inaccessible. So it goes to show, in that example, that technology, even though it's old, doesn't mean it is outdated and useless. I think that's a very interesting mindset. And same thing goes when you talk about our relationship of history. As I mentioned earlier, that there were concepts that were happening in the 19th century that, we think, oh, Victorians are stereotyped as being backwards and repressed and not full, and we're so much better than them. But there are certain ideas about environmentalism, about, to an extent, certain ideas concerning gender roles and sexuality. In understanding of, that may seem strangely modern to us, and also a lot of political ideologies that happened in the 19th century, still are ingrained in our ideas of radicalism, anarchism, utopias, communism. Those are political ideologies that gained traction in the 19th century, dramatically impact the 20th century, and continue to influence our ideas in the 21st century, especially when you get accusations of oh my gosh, we're all going to turn into communists, and socialism is killing us all. And and another thing that I keep hearing a lot about when people involved in the steampunk community, why they like it, is that they're well, our lives suck right now. The economy died. No one can get jobs. Things are so much more precarious than they were 50 years ago. Why did that happen? Where did we screw up? And so you have an assumption about steampunk as an ideology is that it is inherently nostalgic. I don't think so. I think it is inherently self-reflexive, because people who are really involved in steampunk are trying to look for a way out. Because they're okay, we screwed up so much in the past, but how can we bring the good ideas from the past into the present to envision a better future? That's what I hear a lot happening in the steampunk community.
Can I ask you a question? Then I work at a library, and
Yes.
someone came in and said they wanted futuristic steampunk. And so I know, and I'm I don't even know what to recommend for that. It seems like it's counter,
Neil
But what you
Stephenson's
just
The
said-
Diamond Age.
Oh yeah, oh my gosh, the Diamond Age is everything in the
Yes,
kitchen
but-
sink. It's really great. But it's he couldn't choose what kind of book to write, so he wrote them all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're specifically looking for book recommendation, Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age. It's
Definitely.
it has nanotechnology, but all the
Totally.
mores have been reverted back to the Victorian era.
And you choose what group to join. So you can choose to join the Victorians, or other,
not. Yeah.
or the other what do they call them?
would that be using a retrovirus to cure the Black Plague or something like that?
So,
Yeah, well, I just you can't even explain it, because then it's and then there's this part where there's these drummers who end up being a living computer by having a lot of ritualistic sex, and that's how the information is transferred from people to people.
Diamond Age. Okay.
Right, so Diamond Age. I've taught it a few times, and students are always but wait, what's going on here? And how did we get to this place? Right, but it is really, I think it would be the book I would pick for a futuristic steampunk. I'm trying to think what else would have.
But as you were, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was my book recommendation. But yeah, but you're right. I feel steampunk not only is not inherently nostalgic, even though it can romanticize the past, but it is a different type of forward thinking. It is forward thinking with the premise that we have to look back in order to see forward. Another book I actually recommend if you're looking for futuristic steampunk, quote unquote, Tobias Backel's Crystal Rain. It's hard sci-fi, but it actually, like, big reveal, but not really big reveal. It takes place on an alien planet. But the premise was the colonists who came. There was a catastrophe, and they had to start all over. They had to start their technology all over again, and they've now progressed to the steam age. So, and what's also really fun about it is that it's a world where the colonists, came from the Caribbean. So it's a Caribbean-based, science fiction world, and there's also like a rival empire that's based on the Aztec Empire, which is also and aliens.
Lots to like about that, right?
And aliens.
And aliens.
Yeah.
There's aliens.
So,
And I would also put, though there might be some discussion on this. It's not a book, but I would put Firefly in the futuristic steampunk camp.
The short-lived series.
Yeah, the show.
Yeah.
Which, oh wait, I wrote an article about that. Why that's so, but. But yeah, no, I would argue that because it is, we have space travel, but then we also have, very basic kind of, 19th century technology on some of these other
the captain's
planets.
using a revolver.
Right, and
with
stuff
a
like that,
spaceship.
yeah. And some of the way the aesthetics work, I think, also would work for me.
Right.
I think in that way.
Where did the term steampunk come from?
Oh, wait, hold on. Let's see if Monique can answer this
Oh.
question. Monique is a
Where
Let's see if she can say
You
this.
didn't know there was going to be a quiz today.
Do you remember?
The differences in? No, would it
No.
come from something the cyberpunks or something started?
Yeah, you're close. You're close.
Like the 1980s? Started
Yeah,
in the
good,
80s?
good.
That's about all the details. I really thought of me on
Well, the premise is in the late 1980s, there was an author, K.W. Jeter, and he and his friends, Tim Powers, oh gosh, I'm thinking.
Moorcock.
Moorcock. Well, no, Michael Moorcock wasn't part of their group. There was like a third, James Blaylock.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yes.
You're right.
But so three of them were writing Victorian era science fiction pulp adventures, and he was trying to explain to Locus magazine, which is the industry magazine for science fiction, about their books. And of course, the big thing in the 1980s was cyberpunk. And they're like, KW was like, well, I really think the next big thing would be Victorian-inspired science fiction pulp adventures. If you could only find a clever name for it, like steampunk, and thus the word was coined. And but there always has been like a strain of like retrofuturism, in like a 19th century context. Going back like literally since the Victorian era. And now like. Over 20 years after that word was coined, it's become like this art movement. It's become this bigger thing. But that's how the word steampunk itself was created.
And I think it actually like speaks to steampunk's ethos that it took the term that was kind of a throwaway comment
And a joke.
and kind of like sure,
We'll take that.
steampunk, like that's what we're gonna call it. And they were like yeah, steampunk, let's do it, right?
Right.
So I kind of dig that.
So one of the things I heard you mention when you were talking about different authors and books and stuff, you mentioned someone who you called a maker. And I've noticed in the whole makerspace movement, you get that sort of steampunk element to it. Do you want to,
Yeah, I can certainly talk more about that. There's a lot of influences in the steampunk art movement. A big one is maker, especially if you are someone who embraces an ideological component to how you do your steampunk, particularly because since steampunk is all about your relationship with your relationship with technology, the maker movement is totally about that too. Like bringing that into the forefront. Like how do you make sustainable technology? How do you DIY your stuff yourself? How do you innovate in ways that can help the future? And actually, one of the makers I mentioned, Jake Von Slat, he has said in interviews several times years ago that like I want to co-opt steampunk, for the maker movement. He has said that, specifically because like, he the relationship between like steampunk and technology also intersects with how a lot of makers view the potential future of technology. In that it will be customizable, it will be humanized, it will be accessible to everyone, and it is necessary for it not to be, corporatization, for it to be like open source, for it to be available and not particularly controlled by one certain group. They're very much, that's also, and also like upcycling, which is another big steampunk thing, like taking stuff that was trash and being able to reuse it in ways that help the world and help people themselves. So that's where the big maker influence comes in.
So would you say the steampunk came first and then came the makers, or did they sort of
I think they had like
parallel
yeah.
And I think there's a lot of overlap between the two communities too.
There is a lot of overlap. Like if another big influence and development of the steampunk community as an art movement is Burning Man. And Burning Man, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an event that takes place every year in the desert, in Nevada, somewhere out there. But it's basically this big art event, this big, gigantic, interactive art space, and people like purposely bring this is like a giant art car that I made, and it shoots fire, and I'm showing it here, and these are all the like interesting outfits that I made, and and like this, and the very first major steampunk contraptions that had been seen were first seen at Burning Man. There was a Neverwas Hall, which is a giant locomotive style house car that was created specifically for Burning Man. You might have seen that. There's also like other maker like influences that continually show up, but that's really how they intersected, I think.
My friend said there's close correlation between steampunk and dystopia. Is there similarities or differences, or like she's having a hard time like thinking them out? And we're trying to figure out, because we're both writers and we're trying to figure out how to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean there can be overlap. I think that the dystopic aspect comes from why a lot of people are into steampunk, because we see our own society becoming a dystopia. And there's also the aspect of like, the what I call the shock and awe of technology, because technology, and that's the mindset that happened during the last big industrial revolution too. People had this technology and they thought, wow, we can do anything we want, and that is scary. That is frightening. We can screw everything up. And right now we're in a world where like we have all this technology. We could save ourselves or destroy ourselves. And so I think that's where the dystopic element comes from, is that anxiety that comes from our relationship with technology. And there's really cool examples. I say like, I guess Lisa uses this term a lot, steampunk adjacent.
We were talking in the car and I was like, I think everything is steampunk adjacent.
Right.
Point, like,
a good example of that is BioShock. Steampunk adjacent. And it's also totally dystopic, and it also talks about how this dystopia has distinct political ideas that are dystopic and fascist as well, which I think is interesting. Another example is The City of Ember, which is a YA book
Yeah.
series, and it's all about these people who live underground and they have like upcycled like technology. And if you watch the movie, like it has a lot of steampunk elements to it because they're trying to survive underground because they think the whole world is destroyed above.
When they have to.
Well, they don't even know.
Well, they don't even know.
Right,
Yeah.
they don't know.
And they have to fix things constantly. They have
Right.
to keep it all running to survive below there.
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely a correlation between the two.
I would also add that I don't think that steampunk is necessarily, it can be dystopian, but it's not always. Like,
I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
it was or wasn't, but
Right.
she said there was a fine line between the two of them.
yeah, I think so. I would say that often where steampunk would kind of diverge from dystopias is that people can see our ability to kind of reclaim technology and reconfigure those relationships as a way that we could positively affect the future, right? Rather than ending up in this dystopia, Hunger Games future, right?
Yeah.
And part of, I mean, you can kind of see that in the Hunger Games, right? Is that there's this technology
Yeah,
that
because
is
she said there
super
was a
advanced.
slew between the both of them in the Hunger
Right.
Games. They're not.
But if we had a technology where everybody is kind of, if it's decentralized, we're doing it for ourselves, suddenly the capital becomes powerless, right? Except for
Right.
like the nuclear weapons, which is a whole other question, right?
I think I'd be a little bit worried if everyone had a little revolver up their sleeve and pull out.
Yeah, maybe, but I'm also
Maybe not.
thinking, I'm thinking about technology in terms of, basic necessities of, rather than having centralized mass production, of having small, work, like artisan style production.
Right. Or the return of cottage industries.
Right. That's what I was looking
Right,
for.
right.
and I couldn't-
No, another name that gets thrown out there is the arts and crafts movement, which is a historical movement that was actually in reaction to the Industrial Revolution. And they're like, oh no, we have to maintain our love of the handmade items, the love of small industry, because as soon as everything gets mass produced, like it becomes like soulless and nature is destroyed and everything's sad.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
We were just learning that in our class. It feels so
Right.
Oh, there you go.
So
Well,
and
which I know
and
about
again,
this
like
stuff.
that is a difference between what is purely dystopic and what is steampunk with dystopic elements, because the arts and crafts movement was totally like, oh, we have to maintain certain ideas and methods, or else once they're lost, and the world gets like fully industrialized, there'll be nothing to save us.
And some of them have been lost.
Yeah.
Right.
And and I think like steampunk specifically, especially if you go into like the craft side and the art side, you find like you have all these old methods being investigated and resurrected because they're still, as I said, it's still useful, to have around. A great book that I read that specific, it's a nonfiction book that talks about technology. It's called The Shock of the Old. I highly recommend it. It's a really short read, but basically what the author does, he makes a proposal and talks about, oh, look at all these different ways of understanding technology and our relationship with it, and how all of these, and how the definition of technology and work has been misunderstood right now. And it's important to reclaim or understand older technologies in order to move forward in our understanding of what constitutes technology. Because not only does he talk about steam power and the uses of mass production versus like handmade and like railroad systems, he also talks about domestic labor and how often women's labor, was a form, and their use of technology was often ignored in a lot of mainstream histories, and stuff like that. So it's a really great read. Highly recommend that. But that's why I think is the difference between steampunk and dystopia is that steampunk will always try to use technology or, in an ultimately optimistic light. They're like, even if we screwed up in all these different ways, there's still a way to be able to fix things using the technology that we have.
There is. Yeah, there's a definite optimism to steampunk, I think.
What book was that by Shock of the Old?
Yeah. It was, I don't remember the author's name at the moment, but that's the
Yeah.
title of the book.
Thanks.
Yep.
And also arts and crafts stuff is just pretty. There's that too. Although it's interesting to think about, I mean, to connect things to arts and crafts, which is a really kind of interesting movement, because William Morris, who was one of the main people in the early arts and crafts movement, and a lot of his sort of group, which had some, if you want to read like some wacky sexual like gossip, totally look up William Morris. Like his wife was having an affair with Dante Gabriel Rossetti, but they all lived together, and even though he knew what was going on, anyway, so this is a whole big thing. But yeah, in so many ways. But it's interesting because even though William Morris and the people that were doing arts and crafts work in the 19th century were trying to recover these earlier forms of production, they were very keen on getting like the shade of blue that they would have used in medieval times or something like that. But Morris and Company was actually a very successful company, and it sold, you can still buy Morris and Company wallpaper to this day. And someday I will have a lot of it because I love it.
Are you saying Morris and
Company? Yeah, so it was a company. So if you Google Morris and Company, you can still buy their wallpapers. So it was a successful modern capitalist venture that was doing these old style modes of production. And I think that like for me, that corresponds with steampunk's like awareness that it's trying to rework existing systems, but it's always caught up in the modern world, like that we can never fully get out of it, and it's sort of aware of that rather than this kind of the utopian idea that we could somehow get outside of capitalism and have our commune and not have to deal with any of those evils or anything. So I think like that's sort of like awareness that you're co-opted even as you're resisting it is a key part of like what I like about steampunk, I think.
So there's a great explanation that Cory Doctorow, who's a science fiction author, gives about why he loves steampunk, and he says like, oh, it's because like you have these people who are being innovative and creative, and they're making like all these like unique items out of mass-produced crap, like Nerf guns, but they redesign and customize them and individualize them to make them uniquely their own. But at the same time, the raw materials, the crap they use to make their art, are mass-produced in factories in China, being stamped out by children. So like that whole like really complicated mess of like self-awareness and global impact, being like rubbed against each other, even something as like a modded Nerf gun. That's what he said is so fascinating about steampunk.
There is in fact Nerf punk has become a thing. Yeah, it's a thing. It involves wearing lots of orange.
Yes.
Then I can't be a part of that.
So you paint out your brown for orange, right? Any other?
So it was Morris and Company, you're saying?
Yeah, so William Morris was a poet, a craftsman in the late 19th century. And he worked with a lot of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, what's his name? Whose name escapes me. I'm picturing the painting, but I can't picture the name.
It's okay.
But they were particularly interested in reviving medieval styles of art, or pre-Raphaelite, right before the Raphaelites. So you get a lot of these really gorgeous, rich colors. And they were also called in the Victorian period the fleshy school, because they were very interested in bodies, as their shenanigans that I discussed. Illustrates.
Discovery was big back then.
Right. So they were, and they were considered very avant-garde in the 19th century because if you think about like pictures, paintings of just basic landscapes, and then suddenly you have this voluptuous woman who has a certain kind of flesh in her cheeks, who clearly is not a good moral Victorian woman, right? So there was a lot of concern by very conservative people over that. But then that kind of that translates into an interest in different kinds of modes of production, right? And they also did things like they wore these like they they had the women in the long flowing gowns and, you know, sort of like this neo-medieval style. So they were like medieval punks in the 1900s. And there's a really terrible but yet entertaining BBC miniseries about them called I'm picturing the like opening credits, but what is it called? Like just Google it. Just Google like Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood BBC sexy times and it'll because it has Adrian, what's his name, that was also in Being Human, with the dark curly hair, who's
The
attractive
Brit
to look
version
at.
of
Yeah.
Being Human? I
What's
don't
his
know.
name, Adrian something or
But I
another.
love
Is
it.
that the British Being Human or the?
Yeah, the British
Yeah.
Being Human, the one who played the vampire. Anyways,
Note to self.
right. What is it called? Oh, I'm gonna have to Google it now.
Go
It's
to
just cute.
Internet Movie Database and look up Being Human and then look up his
Images.
name and then it'll give you his thing and there you go.
Are there any other questions that people have that they would like to discuss?
So you're from New York?
Yep. So
I was gonna say, I mean, is there a local steampunk?
there is actually during
It's funny you
this
ask.
very weekend. There's TeslaCon, which is, you know, and that's where I came from. I took an hour bus from Madison to get here, and that's why I'm dressed like this too.
Or you don't
'cause-
dress like that every day?
I think it's an awesome outfit.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very good.
But yeah, TeslaCon is going on this weekend. I highly recommend you go if you can. I don't know if tickets have already sold out.
I think there are.
Are there
I
day
think there are
passes?
currently day passes.
Okay.
Because I had to ask Eric about that.
Right, okay. So go if you can. It's amazing. And what's really unique about TeslaCon is that it is a fully immersive steampunk convention. And, you know, one of the other things that attracted me to steampunk is that it's a type of performance art. And TeslaCon is the best about integrating performance in steampunk in a way that is very fun, accessible for all ages, but can also talk about serious subject matters. And each year there's a different theme. So there's one storyline running through. It's going on 5 years. Same storyline, but you don't need to know the storyline. All you need to know is that Dr. Propticus is the bad guy, Lord Bobbins is the good guy, and stuff happens, and it's great. And so each theme covers like a Victorian science fiction premise, and this year is Journey to the Center of the Earth. And then you realize and it's interactive. So like there's these big like storytelling events that you go to, and you go to these events and you're like, oh my gosh, we're traveling down to the center of the earth, and it's hilarious and amazing. And when you go in, you realize it's the hollow earth, and there's dinosaurs. It's the lost world.
I'm really looking
Yes.
forward to the dinosaurs.
Yeah, there are dinosaurs.
It's an awesome movie.
Yeah, it's so fun, and actually, like, in one of the things that TeslaCon did this year to go with the theme, other than like post raptors everywhere, is that he actually like hired an animatronics puppeteer.
Oh wow.
And there's baby triceratops in the lobby that move and talk and stuff, and I was walking around and oh my gosh, dinosaurs, film this. And so it's really fun. It's a total blast, but you can go to panels that talk about makers, talk about costuming, talk about science fiction and history. There's a wonderful tea room that you can like come and visit all weekend, where they have over 30 different types of teas. You can sit down, have some like nice snacks, and have a cup. It's really great.
And is that at the Alliant Energy Center?
It's actually it's in a hotel. It's in the Marriott that's over.
Yeah,
it's
it's
actually
in
in
the-
Middleton,
yeah.
technically.
Oh, okay.
The Madison Marriott
yeah.
West.
Okay.
And it's every year, so if you're interested, definitely like Google it and keep
So
it in your
where
calendar.
is this?
It's in Madison.
It's in Madison.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's called TeslaCon. Yeah, it's put on every year. There's also in Milwaukee there is a Steampunk Society, and they have a Facebook group. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, look them up on Facebook.
Wait, what?
Milwaukee Steampunk Society
Okay.
is what they're called. And they, though my current busy schedule keeps me from being very involved, but they do various kinds of meetups for like, let's all go to the public museum, or let's have a time where we make things in advance of TeslaCon, for example. So there are, any number of ways to get involved. Yeah.
So would you say people come to steampunk more through the literature, or they come through the art? I mean, fashion, that's always been the thing that's been intriguing to me. Not that I'm a big fashion mogul, but...
Yeah, I think they really come from all over, and that is what makes the community so dynamic, because you're like, oh, I'm a maker, and that's why I'm involved. I'm a fashion designer, I'm a writer, I'm a musician, I'm a performer, you know? I'm a teacher, I'm a historian, I'm a reenactor. And that's why you get so many different personal definitions of what steampunk is, because it is directly linked about how you personally are involved. And what I think is very great about steampunk is that it fosters and supports a sense of individual creativity, and people are okay with, with having like different opinions and perspectives about steampunk. Like, and that its greatest strength. It is essentially very decentralized. So.
Well, one thing I think that makes steampunk important is that, like, as like a society develops, technology, they become locked into one path and it blinds you to alternatives. Steampunk helps, like, inspire like new technology in modern age. You can use steampunk as inspiration.
Right. Yep. Totally true.
Definitely. And you can also like use steampunk aesthetic to make like tunnels in your house for your cats, right? Have you seen those? Like, well, they make it look like pipes, and they're actually like little kitty like highways for your house.
Yes.
Yeah, it's cute. Like,
And as long as it helps the cats, I think that's what's important.
anything for the cats.
Anything for the
Yes.
cats, right? It's true. Are there any?
Well, I think you're right at time,
Yeah, we are.
which is perfect.
So we're gonna hang out if people want to chat.
And before you go,
Oh, yeah.
if you would sign our sign-up sheet here,